Hey James, my name's Andy. I saw your comment on the Rebel Wisdom YouTube video, and I really wanted to shoot you a message. My heart just went out to you. Here's what I'm going to do. I'm going to read your comment real quick so that people who haven't heard or seen your comment know what it's all about, and then I'll respond. So, here's your comment. I'll paraphrase in a couple of spots. You say, I've been visually impaired from birth. My eyesight is really bad in bright light particularly. My question is about trying to find value in my situation. This isn't a dragon I can slay, as it's a condition that has been stable from my birth. I grew up in a school with a lot of female teachers, very liberal, who often did things for me or on my behalf without asking me. I always had to have support teachers with me in my lessons, and as you can imagine, this was very uncomfortable. When I tried to talk about this to my teachers, I often got the kinds of looks that a mother would give a puppy. Shut up, we know what's best. There has been this really deep down, boiling anger that I struggle to express and discharge healthily. After school, it was weightlifting, boxing, and Brazilian Jiu-Jitsu. My father died when I was 22, and I felt like my only real masculine anchor was severed. During and after his death, my coping mechanism turned into alcohol, smoking, and drugs. I'm now 31 and really trying and putting effort into understanding why I'm like this and what I can do about it. And over the last few years, I've made some great progress due to Jordan Peterson and many other figures like that. However, I can't shake this feeling that I've wasted my 20s trying to avoid the pain and anger through booze, etc. And I'm worried that my youth is slowly slipping away through my fingers with nothing to show for it. Any advice for what I can do to accelerate the healing process? Books, practical, physical, mental exercises, etc. Thanks, and sorry for the long read. Yeah, not at all a problem on the long read. In fact, James, I just want to honor you. Thank you for your courage in being vulnerable and sharing your story. I know that's not easy to do, and so I just honor you for that. And the other thing I wanted to say, James, right at the outset was that you mentioned here that you were having difficulty finding a healthy way to integrate that anger that you had, and yet at the same time, you've also put a lot of effort, it sounds like, into weightlifting and other and martial arts. And I just think, James, that's awesome. I really admire that. And so I honor you for that work too, brother. So, I want to take a second and just give you some advice. But let me give you a little caveat first. I'm just a dude. I'm not a therapist or a psychologist or anything like that. I've been through some shit in my 20s, and I also adopted smoking and drinking, and I can neither confirm nor deny drugs. And I've come to a better place with all of those things now. And what I want to do here is just share a little bit about what advice I would give you through the lens of what I've been through. And if it resonates with you, great. If it doesn't, no worries. So the first thing I noticed, James, in your comments in terms of the inner work side of things is that you have definitely started cataloging your wounds, and I think that's great. That is the first step on what I would call inner work. That step, you've done it here in two ways. One is specifically you're talking about the visual impairment, which led to this sense of, and I'm going to put words in your mouth here, but this sense of humiliation or maybe even emasculation of having to have other people, especially other women, do things for you. And then that led to anger. And so you've drawn a causal link there from in that wound story. And then the second wound story that I heard was your father died when you were 22. You lost some of your masculine anchor, and as a coping mechanism to deal with what I assume was the pain of the loss, you adopted smoking, drinking, and drugs as a way to deal with that. And so again, you've done this step of here's the wound, and then here's the result, and you've drawn a causal link between those two things. And so you have two stories now like that are the causal stories. And I think, again, that is absolutely on the right track. That is the first step in this inner work. And what I want to share with you is a little bit about how I got to what I think is the next step, and see if that resonates with you. So I'll just tell you a little bit about my story, James. I grew up very religious. I was an evangelical Protestant Christian, and that was just central to my worldview and my life. And then I let that go when I was 22. And along with it, I lost my job, my girlfriend at the time. Many of my relationships shallowed out, and really, those were just the obvious things. I lost a lot more than that too. And really, I don't want to get too much into that, but the point is, after that, I also adopted some of these negative coping mechanisms, self-destructive behaviors, again, the smoking, the drinking, and I spent a long time doing those things and totally asleep, by which I mean the opposite of awake about those things. Just almost blindly trying to deal with the pain of that loss by engaging in these behaviors. And then about a couple years ago, I started to go down this inner work journey. And the first step for me was very much along the lines of the steps that you outlined here. It was this intellectual understanding of the wounds. But there was something I noticed about what you said, James. You said that you're understanding why you're doing this. And that to me is kind of a head word. And it felt like to me maybe that hadn't gotten integrated into kind of an embodied, like, heart space, for lack of a better term. What do I mean by that? Or what does that even look like? I'll tell you what it looked like for me. There was a point in my journey where I was able to see those wounds not just as a causal story, but also as a scared kid coming online, not knowing what to do after having a big loss, and trying to deal with that loss through many, many different ways, and being inadequate at it, but being basically just a scared kid. And when I saw that about myself, I was finally able to forgive myself. And James, I think the big aha moment for me was, I'm worthy of investing in. I'm worthy of the chance to change. I'm worthy of changing. And I could only really believe that I was worthy of changing, worthy of investing in, when I had forgiven myself. And there's this thing about the intellectual side of this work, which is when we're thinking about a wound story, which is this: here's the wound, here's the causal link, and here's the result. On the intellectual side, it can almost become a prison, because that causal story becomes so strong. The causal story is, well, if I really did have this happen to me, and if this is so painful, and if this is a coping mechanism that works, how can I possibly get out of that? I'm in this loop, right? Over and over and over again, I'm in this loop, and I'm stuck in this causal chain. And that's how for me, that's how my rational brain worked that out. But once I could get that causal story embodied, then the result was, I can forgive myself. I can see the dots. I can see how that scared kid came online and messed up a bunch of times, and I can have compassion on that kid. And as soon as I could have compassion on that kid, I could forgive him. And once I could forgive him, I could remember that I'm worthy. And so, James, the message I have for you is you're worthy, brother. You are a beautiful human being. I don't know you, but I saw your picture. You have a great smile, man. You're a beautiful person because you are a human being. I don't exactly believe in God, but I love the term child of God. You are a child of God. And the message is you are worthy. But don't take it from me, because people telling you that you're worthy isn't going to cut it. You've got to figure it out for yourself. And so you asked for advice. The advice I would give you, James, is therapy, for one. I think that sitting down with a therapist one-on-one and working through some of this stuff, if you haven't already done it, definitely worth it. But number two, find some kind of transformational practice that fits for you. And I don't know if you're religious, maybe it's that. I don't know if it's meditation. I don't know if it's, the medicine space. But one way or another, I want you to be able to get to that mountaintop internally and see that scared kid come online, and also see that you're worth investing in. And once you get there, James, it's not about how much time was wasted in your 20s. It's about it's about loving yourself in having taken that long to get to this point on your journey. And I'll tell you, James, it's not worth comparing stories. I'm tempted to do it right here and say, well, there are people who don't get to where you're at now until even later in life than you are, but it's not even worth comparing. It's just about accepting yourself and loving yourself. And it doesn't mean that you give yourself an excuse for what went down, but it means that you forgive yourself. And once you can forgive yourself, you can have compassion on yourself. And once you have compassion on yourself, you can see that you're worthy. And once you're worthy of changing, maybe you will. Thanks, James. Good luck to you, brother.